All right, well, we'll get started tonight. We'll start with prayer, and then we get to look at life's pitfalls. Believe it or not, there are things in life that we're all susceptible to, and some you wouldn't even think would be really all that bad, like, trying to co-sign on someone's loan, where you think that would be a nice thing to do. But you'll find the Bible warns against a lot of those things and says, don't do this, because guess what? You can only decide what you decide. You can't make other people do what's right, and so then you get to bear the burden of other people. And so we'll get to see some of those things of pitfalls in life that we can get ourselves into that the Bible warns us not to. Not everything here is a sin per se, but again, why live like a fool if you don't have to? So let's pray, and we'll get started tonight. Father, thank you for all that you've done for us. Thank you for your many blessings in our lives. Thank you for wisdom that you've given us. Lord, sometimes as we read your word and we see our commands to love and other things, we can take those things to a place where your wisdom might even try to help us to live in a balance of what might be appropriate in a situation, what might not be appropriate in a situation. And Lord, help us to live in wisdom in our lives, that we would live in your wisdom, and Lord, to decide to live life your way. Lord, you know the best way to live. And Lord, help us to do things according to your will. Help us to decide to live in wisdom, and help us to avoid these pitfalls in our life. Lord, these things are pitfalls because they're easy to fall into. These things can be just all around us. Some of them are very simple things that we might not even realize that you hate. And Lord, help us to see these things with the gravity that they have, to see that some of these things you really do not want us to ever do. They are sin. And other of these things, while we might not be able to fully say they're sin, we definitely can say they're foolish. And Lord, help us not to live in foolishness. Lord, help us to live in wisdom and to live a life that's blessed by you. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So life obviously has pitfalls. Pitfalls are things that you don't really always expect, but they're there. In fact, usually they're things that you would think might not be a big deal till you fall into it. And it's interesting because some of these things you would think might actually be good things, might even be virtuous things. For example, if someone can't pay for their loan, or they don't have the credit for their loan, you might think, well, it's virtuous to help them out, to be there for them, so I can just help them out and they can get their loan and do these things. And you'll find the Bible says, don't do that. Is it because you don't love them? No, you do love them. But it's going to end up hurting you, because you'll find that when people don't have to work for things for themselves, they don't really care to pay it off if you'll pay it off. And if you'll do it, because there's someone else to fall back on. What I found in life, my parents, when they kicked us out of their house when I was, went to college. When I went to college, my parents loved me. Okay, both my parents loved me. But they both made it very clear when I was an adult and I was on my own that I was on my own. Okay? And part of that was it kind of drives you that you are now in survivor mode. You better figure it out. And I learned to just figure it out. I asked for my dad for money once while I was in college, and I was so ashamed that I started working 35 hours a week, and I took 19 credit hours, because I was so ashamed that I had to ask my dad to pay for one of my payments. Not to pay for my whole school year, to pay for one payment. And I was so annoyed by that I was like, never again. And I don't ever talk to my dad about money. I don't ever ask him for money. I will never ask him for money if I can help it, because I would be too ashamed. Because my parents raised us, you're on your own, figure it out. Now, that does not mean as Christians that you can't accept Christian charity when people are there for you. It doesn't mean things like that, but it was very much we've given you wisdom to live life, show us that you can live life. And you'll often see people with their own children, they will get themselves into all sorts of trouble because they will be the surety for them. Right? They will say, I'll co-sign your loan, I'll co-sign your house, I'll co-sign your car, I'll co-sign this, I'll co-sign that, I'll co-sign your student loan. And guess who's actually usually paying for those things? Mom and dad are. And we'll look at some of that tonight, even some statistics to show you why it's a pitfall and why God's giving us wisdom. He's not having us hate people. God knows how people are. It's like what Jesus says on what we read on Sunday. He knew what was in man, and he knew what man was all about, and so he knew who was going to be faithful and who wasn't. And God has given us some wisdom because we don't really know all that is in every person to avoid some real heartache in life. And if we'll listen to it, we'll avoid a lot of heartache. So this first pitfall is don't involve yourself. I guess the first avoidance is don't involve yourself as surety for another's debt, as in we'd say today, don't co-sign a loan, okay? Don't co-sign a credit card, don't co-sign a student loan, don't co-sign a car loan, definitely don't co-sign a house. And you'll find people will do all these things because they love whoever they're doing it for. And again, we should love people. God commands us to love people, but this is not an act of love. If it were an act of love, God would tell us to do it. But the fact that God warns us of it should show you that it's not an act of love to do this for someone. In fact, I often think that we hold people back because we do too much for them at times. Because people will not grow unless you give them ability to. For example, if you go to the gym and you lift the lightest weights, are you ever going to build the muscle that you desire? No. You might get the tone of Arnold Schwarzenegger, but not his size. But it's not going to do much for you. You're not going to be able to lift anything heavier. You're not going to be able to do anything in life because you've not put your body under stress, whereby after the stress, it heals itself and grows. And that's how life works. You put yourself under stress, and that's how you grow. In fact, I often hear when people have new ministries to deal with whatever, they are stressed to the wazoo. That's a good thing. You know why? Because you're growing. Now, you don't want life to be overwhelming, but you want life to have enough controlled stress that you're growing, not overwhelmed, but growing. Even for our children, I want to do everything for my son. I'll see him try something, and I'll see someone try to intervene and help him, and I'll say, don't do that. And they'll look at me kind of funny. I said, just let him figure it out. Because if he can figure it out, guess what? He'll grow, and he'll know how to do it again the next time because he learned how to do it. But if I have to wipe his butt till he's 80 years old, God bless me for that, okay? Because you should be teaching your children things that are difficult for them in that moment because that's what's going to help them grow. Even with this, right? You learn to work for things before you have them, right? Instead of having someone else come in as your surety for the debt that you are going to accrue. So the first thing that we see here is that it is dangerous to be surety for another's debt, right? It's a dangerous thing for us because, again, you're going to be accountable for it because, believe it or not, most people, if they have surety from someone else for their debt, they're going to let the other person pay for it. That's just statistically true. It's not just God's word saying it, and I'm going to show you that in a bit. First, we see in verse 1, he says, "My son, if thou be surety for thy friend, if thou hast stricken thy hand with a stranger," he says, "thou art snared with the words of thy mouth, thou art taken with the words of thy mouth," right? It's going to trap you. You're going to be in a place that you're now stuck because you're going to have to figure all this out. Again, the first thing that he says there is to be surety for someone, right? To be willing to pay their loan and really kind of their high interest. To charge someone usury in that culture was considered an abomination. So first of all, to put yourself in a situation anyways where someone was being charged usury and you were going to take the weight of that was probably even dumber because you weren't supposed to be doing it in the first place. And so he's already warned them in the law, don't charge usury anyways, but definitely if someone's going to be charged interest, don't say, hey, I'll help you with that. I'll make sure that you paid off. I'll make sure you do all these things because to be surety for someone is to really put yourself in a dangerous situation because you're going to have to pay for that. By the way, a lot of people co-sign loans with their children and relatives or people that they themselves can't actually pay for. It's almost like double stupidity because then if you have to pay for it, guess what? You're going to have to pay for it. And then what happens in life? Well, you get into all sorts of hurt and trouble and hardship. And I'm sure all of us have seen people in our lives that we know of who've done this for people, whether it's their kids. Usually it's people's kids because you have a soft spot for your kids, don't you? Yeah, you just do. Usually it's for your own kids. Sometimes it could be a relative. If you're really crazy, I guess it could be for a stranger. That's real stupidity. But with all this, though, you do see a lot of people who participate in these things, they get burned really bad. And they end up being the ones that suffer, not the one who got the loan. And so he says, right, if you're going to be surety for thy friend, if thou hast stricken thy hand with a stranger, again, to strike your hand with someone was to make a deal with them, to make an agreement with them. We would think of it today almost like a handshake. It probably is not the exact same motion as we would do a handshake, but there was a day in our country where if you shook hands with someone, that was your contract. Right? Your word was your bond, right? We used to say that, and nowadays it's like, well, I didn't sign on the line, so get away from me. If you did that 50 years ago, they'd beat you up for it, okay? You weren't getting away with it. They were going to make sure that you did what you committed to because your word was your bond. It meant something. And even here, right, don't just come to an agreement with someone. We could say today, don't sign a contract with them whereby you're going to be bound because you're going to be what? snared by the words of thy mouth, thou art taken with the words of thy mouth. Even we use that word, right? You're bound by a contract. What does it mean to bind someone? To handcuff them. You're stuck. You're not getting away from it. Right? Even the idea of a snare, right? You're trapped. You're not going anywhere. And so again, you can see that this is a very dangerous thing to participate in. So it's not just dangerous, again, and the reason it's dangerous is because you don't know what the other person's going to do. Here's a couple headlines that I actually just found today from this past year. This was 2 years ago. Many parents spend more years paying off student debt for their kids than they do raising them. You know why? Most parents co-sign for their children's student loans, and when their children don't pay it, guess who gets to pay it? The parents do. And they spend more time paying off their own kids' student loan debt than they do raising their own children. And that was from 2 years ago. And then you can see why they keep trying to forgive student loan debt, because everybody in Congress is probably paying their own kids' student loan debt. And so whenever they want to do something, it's because it benefits them, in case you didn't know. And then this was another one that I saw. This was from MoneyWise. Right? Staggering 51% of parents now worry they'll have to put off retirement after co-signing their kids' college loans. How this helpful decision can make up your own financial future, right? And this is just student loans. And by the way, I think it was 80% of student loans are co-signed by parents because they think it'll help their kids' chances. By the way, it doesn't change your chances. They do that because they know kids might not pay it back, so they're going to make sure someone pays it back. So they put it on there to hope that you'll be stupid enough to co-sign. And I don't mean that, sorry, if you've co-signed, I don't mean that you're stupid. You're just what the Bible would say is a fool. And so it doesn't help. So I didn't say it, God did. So this is why Jesus said many left him, right? The saying was a hard one, okay? You don't have to co-sign for people, not even your own children. To do so is very dangerous. I have witnessed people in my life who've co-signed for their kids, and they're too busy paying off their kids' debt they can't even pay for their own life and their own personal needs. Because, again, who would you love more in life than your own children? And those children are the ones that they always prey on, right? You go get a car loan. You don't have enough credit. And they say at the car dealership, well, just go get mom and dad. They can co-sign for you. And so they call up mom and dad. Mom, dad, I really need a car. I got to work. And so if you can come co-sign my loan, that'd really be a help. I know that you love me. Right? That's how kids talk, right? That's not how your kids talk, but you probably did what my parents did and said, when you're out of here, you're out of here. Good luck. We've given you wisdom for life. Figure it out. And obviously, nobody would ever let their kids be fully destitute, right? If your child was homeless, you'd probably say, you can move in with me, but you're living in my house under my rules, under my conditions, right? And it would drive them to what? To go figure it out, because nobody wants to be under mom and dad's rules again. And we've all had family that have done that. Maybe some of you did that if you got married young, right? My parents did that when they first got married at 19 years old, right? They lived with mom and dad for, I think, 3 months, and they got out real fast, okay? They figured it out and said, we don't like this, and made sure that they were out on their own. And that's how life is sometimes, but this is not that. This is putting your own self on the line for someone else who really should be learning to save up and to pay for their own things in life. If you can't afford it now, you shouldn't want it, because you can't have it until you can afford it. And so again, if you do become surety for someone else's debt, you should try to get out of it if possible, because it could destroy you. So what if you've made the mistake of co-signing a loan? Well, the Bible's advice is figure out how to get out of it. You might say, well, shouldn't you keep your word? Well, you should. You're trying to figure out how to get out of it legally. You're not trying to figure out how to not pay it. You're trying to figure out, how do I get myself off of this now? Because, again, the Bible's trying to warn you, as long as you're on there, guess what? Someone else has a safety net, and trust me, people who are immature, which is all children and all young adults, they're all immature. In case you're curious, just go look at how they live. They're all immature. Guess what? They're going to let you be the safety net. Because if someone has something to fall back on, they will. But it's when you live in that place of there's nothing else to fall back on, I better figure it out, that people actually do one amazing thing that starts with an M. They mature, and they learn how to make it work. And so this is what you see here as well. In verse 3, it says this: do this now, my son, right? If you do this right away. Deliver thyself when thou art come into the hand of thy friend. Go, humble thyself, and make sure thy friend, as in pester him. You could even say badger him, right? Annoy him to death till he says, okay, fine, I'll figure out a way to get you off of this, right? You just keep pestering them till they figure it out. And so again, it's kind of the judge and Jesus proverb, right? He hears the woman who keeps knocking at his house in the middle of the night saying, hear my case, hear my case, hear my case. And the judge is so tired of it, he says, fine, I'll hear your case, what's going on? And then he hears it, says, fine, you can have whatever you want, just leave me alone. People tend to be that way, where if you just keep pestering them, say, hey, I need out of this, 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 I need out of this. Can you let me out of this? This is really your responsibility. Can you let me out of this? They might get so tired of hearing from you that they might actually let you get out of it. This is why he says, again, go humble thyself. Because, again, it's embarrassing to say, I don't want to do this anymore. You have to then humble yourself and basically beg them and say, please let me out of this. Because guess who's in control? Because your name's on that line. You're not the one in control. They're the ones in control. That's why he'll say, give not sleep to thine eyes, nor slumber to thine eyelids, right? This is important. Make sure that you do this diligently, right? Don't give up till it's done. Deliver thyself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler, right? If you do this, you'll deliver yourself. You should want to escape it, right? Again, roes are escaping, right? Hunters. Birds are escaping, right? The fowler, the bird hunter, right? They're escaping them. They're trying to get out of the trap. They're trying to run away because they know that if they stay in the trap, it's not the death of the hunter, not the death of the fowler, it's their own death. And so again, the person who this harms, if you don't get out of it, is probably going to be you, the person who decided to be involved with it. And so again, what we'll see very clearly is that after you deliver yourself, this is what needs to happen, is you need to get away from it and run as far away from it as possible. And again, I say all this because, again, it seems kind of antithetical to say that this is somehow the right thing to do, because you'd think the loving thing to do is, well, you just bail them out whenever you can. You just do whatever you can for your kids. And that's what we hear all the time in our culture. Do whatever you can for your kids. Just, bail them out whenever you can. Do all these things for them. That's not how people learn. In fact, the prime example of this, by the way, is the prodigal son in Luke 16. Not Luke 16. It's right around there. I think it's 15, actually. But right around there, you have the prodigal son who, guess what? Dad doesn't go chase after his son, even though he knows he's being stupid. Dad doesn't go do any of those things. Dad waits for son to figure it out. And guess what? The prodigal son, because he wastes everything, he finally comes to the end of himself, and the Bible says he sits there among the pigs and says, why am I living here? Why am I doing this? I could go back home and turn my life around, and life would be much better. I could be a slave in Dad's house, and I'd get better off than this. And guess what? Once he repents, that's when Dad opens the blessings, because now son is mature enough to realize, okay, now it's time to come home. Now it's time to live life differently. Because until someone hits rock bottom, I guarantee you, they're not going to change. And so even the person here, guess what? If you're surety for them, right? If Dad in the prodigal son story had come along and said, hey, don't worry, you don't have to live here. I'll pay for you to go somewhere else. I'll pay for you to do this and that. Guess what son's going to go do again? He's going to go back to the riotous living. He's going to go back to the friends that he had. He's going to go back and do the exact same things over and over and over again, because he's never had to come to the end of himself. And that's why the most unloving thing you could do is actually bail out your children every time. You know why? Because they'll never grow. They'll never change. The most loving thing you could do when someone is trying to get you to essentially be their bailout program is say, sorry, I'm not your bailout program. I love you, but I can't do this for you. You know why? Because if they're going to be stupid enough to get into all this debt, they need to experience the pain that it brings so they learn to never do it again. How many of you have been in debt and it's brought pain in your life before? Yeah. How many of you did Dave Ramsey to figure out life? Okay. A few of you are shaking your hands. Yes. Yeah. Thankfully, I was exposed to Dave Ramsey before I got into debt, and so I just listened to all the poor people on there and realized I don't want to spend money ever, and except for the times that I do, in which case I'm the person in our household. I make big purchases. My wife makes a bunch of small purchases. We still end up fine because we communicate our purchases to each other. We don't just both spend the same money. Okay, but with all that, you learn that you don't want to do that. You don't want to be like the people who are now in suffering because they're in bondage, right? The debtor is slave to the lender, and if you want to be someone's slave, go into this. Be their surety, because you're not just a slave to the lender, you're a slave to the person who was lent to, because until it's paid off, you get to keep paying it. So again, one of the pitfalls in life is essentially, right, just love people no matter what and do these things for them. That's not love. Especially don't be surety for them, right? Don't say, I'm going to just pay off your loans if you can't pay it. I'm just going to do these things for you if you can't do it, because there's no way you can keep that promise. I always tell people, I'll do what I can for you. You know why? Because I'll do what I can. I can't do what I can't. And again, you should be there in love for people, but there are some things you just can't do. And no matter how much you promise, because believe it or not, you're human. And you can't keep all the promises you make. There's only one person who keeps all the promises they make. It's God, because he has the ability to. So don't be foolish enough to put yourself in the situation. And if you are, because some of you in this room might be in the situation, figure out how to get out of it. Go find a lawyer, go talk to whoever it is that you're co-signed for, and figure out how to get off it. Because at some point, it's going to really hurt. And again, I'm just warning you, because God's word is statistically true. And so again, you could be the exception, but I doubt it, because an exception is usually 1 in a billion. So unless you're one of 7 people who exist in the world right now that won't experience this, you're probably not. Okay? All right, so the first pitfall, again, to avoid it, is to avoid or don't involve yourself as surety for another's debt. The second thing is that we should be hardworking and productive. It's kind of the opposite, right? Instead of depending on everyone else, kind of like the person who's saying, hey, co-sign my loan, do this for me. Instead of being dependent, what do? Well, you go learn to work really hard. And you go learn to be very productive in life, where you don't even have to have someone who's constantly overseeing you to make sure you're doing what you should be doing. And by the way, if you're someone who has to have someone overseeing you for you to do the right thing, you're a very foolish person. And you're a very unproductive person. And you're a person that God looks at, and God looks at kind of with despise. Because again, you should have enough integrity in your heart to be able to do a good job, even if no one else is there to make sure you're doing a good job. And so the first thing that we see here, as we should be hardworking and productive, is that God teaches us how to live through nature, which fulfills its God-given design. Again, you as a human being are the only thing in nature that does not do what God says. You realize that everything else in nature, besides maybe some aspects of the curse like death, right? So you'll have some animals that'll hunt other animals, but besides some of those aspects, all animals do what they were designed to do. We call it instinct, right? They just know, this is what I do. This is how I do things. Why? Because they were created to do those things. And they always, no matter what they are, always do those things. For example, ants always build ant hills and go and garnish whatever food they can and bring it back home. Doesn't matter what kind of ant it is. It could be a fire ant, it could be an army ant that even eats people, okay? Doesn't matter how big or small the ant is. They all do the same thing, right? They all work together. They all go get food. They all work hard. They all protect the queen. They all do the same thing. Same with birds, right? Birds will eventually all leave the nest, and if they don't, they die. No one's going to help them if they die, okay? They just kind of kick them out. Now, I'm not saying you should do that with your children, but I am saying, nature does do that. Why? Because that's how God's designed them. God's designed them to be, at this stage in life, this is where you should be. Why? Because animals do what they're designed to do, right? Even when it comes to any animal you could think of, that's essentially how it is. And they teach us wonderful things about God because they teach us about his design and kind of his expectations for things. And so it allows us as human beings to go observe nature, and humans used to do this. We like to just observe television now. We observe everything that's fake. In fact, even all the animals are CGI. In fact, I saw a trailer today. They're making a Mufasa movie, which I was like, oh, wow, a prequel to Lion King. That's just what we need right now. And so they're making a Mufasa movie. And guess what? All the animals are CGI. There's not a single real animal in that movie. You know why? Because even nature we want to view as fake. And so God in his word has told us to what? Go observe nature. Why? Because it'll teach you something about him. So Solomon here is going to go observe the ant. Why? Because the ant teaches you a lot about hard work and a lot about saving up and a lot about the fact that, hey, winter's coming. You better make sure you got what you need for winter. You could even say the same thing with the squirrel or with the bear or whatever else that might hibernate in the winter, right? Squirrels do what? Well, they fill up all they have with different foods, acorns, whatever else you can think of to prepare for what? Hibernation. I'm going to have to eat all winter long while I sleep. And we all wish that we could do that, don't we? But that's not life anymore. You don't live in an agrarian culture. So if you want that back, I guess you can live in subsistence living. But we don't live that way anymore, so we work all year round. But with that, you do see that in nature, right? They save up, they work hard for the time they know they're going to need the reward of their labor. So here's what he says, right? Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, right? So maybe he's calling his own son a lazy person, I don't know. But he is saying this to the sluggard in general, right? Because he's saying to the lazy person, go look at the ant, go look at them, look what she does, consider her ways, consider how the ants act and behave and what they do. And what? Be wise, learn some wisdom. because even you can learn wisdom from a little ant. You might be a lot bigger than they are, but they're a lot more industrious than you are. And so go learn what it means to work hard. What we'll see here is that a productive worker, like an ant, does not need oversight to get work done. Believe it or not, there are not other ants that make sure other ants do what ants should do. Ants just do what ants should do. In fact, the only way they know where to go is they all leave basically chemical trails, right? And they know to go here or not go there. Mice kind of do the same thing. That's why if you ever have mouse poop in your house, you know why it's there? Because it's a safe spot. Right? They're telling all the other mice, you can sit here and be fine, they won't catch you. And so if you ever find poop, that's where you should put whatever you need to get them, because it's safe, right? And so they release all those chemicals. Well, ants do the same thing, right? They know exactly where to go. And the queen ant doesn't come out and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. The soldier ants aren't there to make sure they should be doing what they should be doing. The soldier ants are actually there to protect them. The ants just do what they're supposed to do without any supervision. They don't need any oversight whatsoever. And this is why he says, right? They have no guide, overseer, or ruler, right? The one ant is not showing the other ant where to go per se. Like I get they leave chemical trails and things like that, but it's not quite the same thing. It's not like they're showing them, here's how you do this, ant. Let me show you how to gather food. Let me show you how to do this. Let me show you how to do that. No, they just know how to do it. No one has to take them there. They are, by their own nature, saying, I'm going to go. I'm going to go where the food is. No one has to tell me to go there. I'm just going to do it, right? So you kind of see that they have something that we would, what's the word I'm looking for? When no one has to tell you to do something, you just do it on your own. What's the word I'm looking for? You guys know it. Initiative. That's really the word I'm looking for. Motivation was a good second, right? He has initiative, right? No one has to say, Ant, you got to get up today and you got to go work. He has what? He has no guide. He has initiative to what? To just go do the task. And so again, you'll find if someone who has integrity, they don't have to wait and basically be shown what to do. They have initiative. They'll get it done. Now again, by the way, if you don't know how to do something, you should ask, okay? That's not what this is saying. But it is saying if you know what to do, go do it, right? To be lazy is a waste of life. You're not here to waste away. What a waste of life. It's the same when people talk about just ministry in general. I always think of D.L. Moody, right? D.L. Moody was on his way to England for something, and the big storm came up, and because he was going to retire from ministry. And he got convicted in his heart as he went that, well, if you're going to retire, what use do I have for you being here? Right? And it's kind of one of those things that if you're just existing, I don't mean to be mean, but what's the point? And God views that way of a lot of things, right? Go look at the ant, right? It doesn't need a guide to tell it what to do. It has its own initiative. It has no overseer, right? There's not someone there to whip it into shape, to say, hey, you got to keep working, right? You can almost think of the taskmasters in Egypt, right? They're not there to, right? The taskmasters are there because the slaves aren't going to do stuff on their own. And so it's not like the person who is like the ant needs someone there to make sure that they're doing the job, who can say, hey, you need to work harder, right? They know what it means to work. The person who lives like the ant knows what it means to work and to give their best and not have to say, hey, why did you stop working? Why are you just sitting here? Get up, let's work. What are you doing? And so again, someone who is like the ant doesn't just have initiative, but really they're industrious while they're there. They're getting something done. Maybe I can find a third eye for ruler. I don't know. But right, they're industrious. They're working really hard because no one has to tell them what to do. They already know that they need to be working. And then it says, or ruler. Right? There's not someone who's there who's going to come kind of just check up on them over time. Or someone who's going to have to say, hey, you need to go do this. The queen ant doesn't tell them, go get food. Right? There is, in a sense, a queen ant that's there. But she's not there to come check on them. She's not there to go do certain things for them. And really, in a way, we just call her the queen, right? That doesn't mean she actually has any rulership. You realize all the queen does is lay eggs, right? And tells the ants where to protect where their nest is. She doesn't actually tell them what to do. And so again, in a sense, they have no ruler. Right? There's not someone who's there to say, do this, do that. Right? They know what they need to do because they're trying to protect the queen, right? Even though she's really not a ruler, but she's the most important because without her, there's no life. You don't get to have more ants. And so again, I say all that to say, right, they don't need someone else who's there to guide them, to rule over them, to do these things for them, to make sure they're doing what they should be doing. They just do it on their own. And so again, if you're a person who always needs oversight in life, I'm telling you, there's something wrong with you. You don't live like a wise person. You live like a fool. A wise person knows how to do things and just do things. They don't sit there and wait, well, I'm just going to sit here until someone tells me something to do. That is the worst kind of worker. And I know because I had to work with a lot of people like that. I did security when I was in Pensacola, and I was very much let's just get the job done kind of person because I wanted to go to bed. Because security always got to do things at 1, 2, 3 in the morning, right? Well, we had something every year called convocation, which convocation, or even commencement. Commencement was graduation. So at commencement, we got to put up pylons and everything else overnight, the night before, and then direct traffic the morning of. All over campus to show people, here's where you can go, here's where you can park, here's the direction you need to go, put up signs and all these things. The whole setup took, with probably 10 people, probably 3 hours. And that's if everybody's working hard. And again, I always had the joy of being the one that was selected to do this. And so I got to go and basically say, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to work. This is how we're going to do things. And you'd always find a couple people that would find their way somehow inside upstairs and just say, well, we don't know what we're supposed to be doing right now. And trust me, at 3 in the morning, when you know you got to be up at 8 a.m. to direct traffic with a bunch of Christians who hate you because you're telling them where to go, you don't like people like that. You just look at them and say, well, I'll tell you what to do, and then you go give them the worst job once you find them, right? Because at least you know where they'll be. And again, I say all that to say because there are always people who, no matter what you do, will be there to laze around. And a lot of it today is because people think, well, I have minimum wage, I'll do minimum work. By the way, you should always work your value. You'll never get paid your value unless you work your value. So if you're going to laze around and be stupid and do all those things, guess what? Don't be surprised when you work at McDonald's for the rest of your life because that's all that'll hire you. And so what you find in life in general is those that get ahead are those that do things with their own initiative and do things without having to be pestered to do things. You know why? Because they know how to get it done. And those are the kind of people that people want to promote and people want to do things for. I get we live in a culture that might not promote that way in the corporate world, but the corporate world doesn't make up that much of stuff anymore. They have their own set of rules by which they want to promote stupidly, I guess you could say. And you can see how well it's working out for them. The rest of the world promotes based on hard work. And again, if you're not going to work hard and you're not going to have initiative, you're not going to get anywhere in life. And this doesn't just go to actual workforce. This works at home too. If you have no initiative at home, guess what? Nothing gets done. Because there's going to come a day when you're going to grow up, and some of you have already, and you're going to leave home. And guess who gets to do the dishes and gets to cook and gets to do all those things? You do. And so if you have no initiative and you just say, well, I don't have anyone telling me what to do now, and so I'm not going to do anything, you're going to learn real fast that you can't live life that way. So what? Learn to be industrious. Learn to work hard. And by the way, if you learn to work hard, life becomes really easy. You know why? Because no one really expects you to work as hard as you probably do. And so guess what? When people are come to be fired, it's probably not going to be you that's going to get fired. It's going to be the person who's not productive and the person they need to cut. A productive worker, right? They don't just not need oversight. A productive worker prepares for the future in his labor. Again, why do you work? It's kind of your purpose for working. Right? The purpose for working is to prepare for the future. Again, we all work to prepare for the future. Some of you worked many years. Some of you are retired. You worked a lot of years and put away for a long time so you could do this thing called retire. And again, you do those things. Why? Because you know at some point in your life, it's just not possible to do it anymore. Again, we read about the person last week who was caught up in adultery. And they found out, guess what? Now I get to live in poverty the rest of my life because no matter what I do, I'll have to work till my bones are brittle. Because that's what life does. Because life does not stop even if you've spent everything. Life still goes. And you still have to prepare for what's there. Again, winter always comes. It doesn't matter what you do in the summer, winter always comes. And so guess what? Even for the ant is made sure to be productive. It says he provideth her meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. Right? So she has what she needs when the time is to have it in the initial moment, right? She has her food there, but then she gathers what? Beyond that. Right? So she makes sure that she doesn't have just enough for now, she has enough for later. And if you're living life to where you just have enough for now, you're not a very wise person. A wise person doesn't just prepare for now, they prepare for later. Now, for those of you that are younger, like Alan over here, right? Alan's younger. And so for those of them that are younger, like Alan, he has this thing in life called time. And there's this wonderful thing with time called compound interest, where if you put away when you're younger, guess what happens? It's really easy to become a millionaire by the time you're 40 or 50. And then usually be a multimillionaire and well ready to retire by the time you're 70. Now, that won't be worth that much then, but If you prepare earlier, guess what? It goes a lot farther. But if you wait and wait and wait and wait and wait, guess what? Life gets really hard. In fact, they found that if you put $100 a month away for your child, for every child that you have, which nowadays $100 is money, but it's not like groundbreaking money. Okay, when I was a kid, $100 was a lot of money. When you were a kid, it was really a lot of money. When my grandfather was a kid, I mean, he told me about the time he brought home his first $500 bill. They gave it to him as a bill instead of a check because he was so proud of it. He worked for John Deere. And back then, that was worth like $4,000 in a week, right? Because, again, we don't realize how much inflation has occurred. That was a big deal back then. But again, nowadays, that's not a whole lot. If you did that every month from the time they are 0 to the time they turn 18, and then they don't touch it till they retire, they'll still have millions of dollars by the time they retire. Why? Because time works for you a lot better than anything else does. And so if you prepare, and we're not doing that with our kids yet, we should. I read that a couple weeks ago. But if you prepare, guess what? You can set up all sorts of people for success. You have something in life which the Bible says the wise man doesn't just leave enough for his children, but for his grandchildren. Why? Because he knows how to prepare for the future. He's prepared so much, he has enough not just to live on the rest of his life, but enough to share with his children and grandchildren when he dies. And that's not out of reach for anyone. You could make basically McDonald's wages in the U.S. and still do that. You know why? You just trickle away at it the rest of your life. And you learn how to be disciplined. And guess what? You could retire really well even off that if you learn how to be disciplined and how to not just provide your meat for today, your food for today, but to gather your food for tomorrow and just put away over time. And it'll reward you greatly. So again, a productive worker prepares for the future in his labor. A productive worker does not sleep when he should be working. Right? I don't want to say this in a negative way. In a sense, they don't take days off. And I don't mean that to say that you can never have a day off or never have a Sabbath, but when it's time to work, it's time to work. They're not giving excuses, right? To say, well, I'm not going to work today. I'm just so tired. I just can't go to work today. I'm just so tired. Just so this. I just can't do this today. Oh, it's just, I know I got to do all these things, but I'm just so tired. You know, I deserve it. I deserve it. Right? That's why I hear today from I deserve this. Which sometimes, is it okay to enjoy a vacation? Yes, but it's not okay to enjoy a vacation Monday through Friday every week. Retirement, thank you, Judy. But you've already worked for it. So, I mean, you've prepared for it, right? But the reality is there are people now who basically enjoy a vacation Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, and they can't figure out, why am I poor? Why do I need this or that? I mean, the government kind of is their usurer, which we all get to pay for it. So congratulations, you're all surety for a bunch of people in the United States. And you feel it, don't you? Because you have this thing called high taxes because of it. All I have to say, though, when it comes to being a productive worker, you should be working and not sleeping. Again, verse 9, how long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? So again, you have the first person who just sleeps all the time, right? They oversleep. It's kind of a joke in my generation. You'll see this with people. They'll post videos about their alarm going off and them hitting snooze, and then all of a sudden it being like, a couple minutes later, and then a couple minutes later, and then all of a sudden it's half a day later, and they're like, oh no, I missed half of the days of work. Because what? You just love sleep so much. That bed is just so, especially in the winter, that bed is just so warm. You can feel the coldness on your face and all those things, and it's like, oh, I really don't want to get out right now. I'm just going to hit snooze. Oh, that was nice. I can do it again. And just hit snooze. Oh, I can do it again. And then you forget that you didn't hit snooze the last time you hit, shut up fully, right? You canceled out of the alarm altogether, and now it's 2 hours later, and you're late for everything. And guess what? Even in America, if you're late enough for a job, you lose your job, okay? You don't just get to keep it because of the fact that you exist, which is how people want to act today. I exist. I have worth. Your worth is what you make of it, okay? Your worth is not just because you exist. You have inherent worth in the sense that you're made in the image of God, but that doesn't mean that you're worth being paid. That doesn't mean someone else has to pay for you. You are worth the value that you bring. And that's how life works. And so again, we always want to be gracious in a sense, but again, be your worth. If you're so valuable, act like it. Everyone today wants to talk about how valuable they are. If you're so valuable, act like it. Work like it. Don't just sleep in all the time. Because again, you're forming habits. By the way, if you're a teenager, like Alan, if you're a teenager like Alan, guess what? If you decide to sleep in now, guess what that forms habits for? Sleeping in later. Right? If you're someone and you're a teenager, because there are a few teenagers in here, if you're someone who lazes around now, guess what? You're going to laze around later too. Now is the time in life to learn discipline because guess what? You're still at home when you can make mistakes, and life is not so bad if you make mistakes right now. But there's coming a point in life when you make mistakes, those mistakes you get to bear the full brunt of, and it's going to really hurt. So if you learn now to live on schedule, and again, that does not mean that you can't enjoy life. Again, I have a day a week where I can stay up all night that I want to and sleep in if I choose to. And I guess unless there was a catastrophe, in which case I, as the pastor, get to go to it anyways, right? But I have a day a week where it doesn't really matter what I do. It's my day of rest. But every other day, usually by such and such time, I know I got to be in bed, I got to do this, or I'm going to have a grumpy day tomorrow. Now, as you become an adult, some of you teenagers will find out that when you have children, you get to live on their schedule too. And if they wake up in the middle of the night, life is just rough, and you get to learn to be happy even when you're tired. And that's just how life is. But he says, right, how long are you going to sleep? How long are you going to do this? How long are you going to lay there and just laze around? Because if you're lazing around, is anything getting done? At least not by you. And that's not a good way to live. It says, yet, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man. Right? And so again, he mentions first here, right? I like how he says that, a little sleep, a little slumber, right? Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. And I always think, too, because we all do this, right? Especially if you sleep on your back. How many of you sleep on your back? How many of you are side sleepers? Stomach sleepers? Okay, at least I know who the safe people are. Stomach people, I got you. I'm a stomach sleeper, okay? Because that's how God has told us to live, obviously. But we all have different ways we sleep. But it's interesting, though, that if you sleep on your back, you kind of do just, oh. And there's just something about, even if you do sleep on your stomach, sometimes you'll flip over, and you'll just put your hands like this, and you go, oh. And there's just something about that just makes you want to sleep some more, doesn't it? And that's why he says a little bit of the folding of the hands to sleep, right? You just kind of put yourself in that posture, and what happens? You waste away the whole day. How many of you have woken up at 9, 10 o'clock before, in the middle, maybe on a Saturday or something, not during the work week, but maybe on a Saturday, and you're just like, I could just lay here all day. How many of you have thought that before? I could just lay here all day. Okay, yeah. Most of us are younger. For those of you that are like really productive, you're like, never for me, okay? We can't all be that holy, okay? Some of us still live in the flesh. The Bible says the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, okay? Some of us have weak flesh, and you lay there on Saturday, and you're like, man, I could just lay here all day. And guess what? If you live life that way, guess what happens? Your poverty will come as one that traveleth. The idea is it'll be surprising. It'll be shocking. It'll come on you and you don't expect it. And thy want as an armed man, right? Your want, your need will be as a man who robs people, right? And someone robs someone because they have need usually. I get we live in a culture with cartels and weird things like that and gangs and whatever. But back then, you didn't just rob people, okay? Being a robber was not a profession of life, okay? What you did back then is you robbed people if you really needed it. And so you would rob people if you were in desperation. And so when he says your want or your need will be as an armed man, it's the fact that you're going to be desperate. You're going to be so desperate, what are you probably going to be trying to do? Rob people. What's interesting, and this is not necessarily an attack against the city of Flint, but when Flint had all sorts of good jobs, guess what they did not have? A whole lot of crime. But when all the jobs go away, guess what people need to do to live? They got to steal from somebody because I need what I need. And so again, I always say you're only as moral as you have what you need. When you lack what you need, your morals tend to go out the window because you have to take care of what you have to take care of. And we can all say in our own piousness, I would never steal a loaf of bread. If you were hungry enough, you would eat someone. You know how I know that? Because the Bible talks about people who supposedly worship the Lord. When they were hungry enough, they ate people. Gary's laughing. Gary's like, I don't ever want to do that. You're right, Gary. Gary sees his deer, and he's like, I could eat one of those. And so you'd rather go to work, yeah. But what's the point? It's unexpected poverty. And tragedy always happens in life, but the point is if I work hard, guess what I don't have to expect comes? I don't have to expect poverty to come. If I save for the future, when I can no longer work because my body is worn out because of age, and I have saved for the future, guess what I don't have to worry about? Poverty. Why? Because you're taken care of. Because you've done what you should have done. Now again, can tragedy strike at any moment? Sure. Most of us have never witnessed a tragedy that has ever fully overtaken someone who's actually saved the way they should. If someone lives the way they should, they save the way they should, unless America was somehow under a great attack where everyone was then being impoverished, guess what? It's everyone then, not just you. And most of us have never lived to see a moment like that. So again, what I'm trying to say is, if you live life God's way, the chances of something that terrible happening are basically zero. Because again, we don't live through those things even once in a few generations. Those are once in a maybe few centuries thing. Okay? All right, so he doesn't, by the way, I want to say this too. Solomon here does not negate the need for sleep, okay? Because there are people who will say, well, the Bible says, a little folding the hands of sleep, I can't ever sleep, I can't ever rest. Okay, you still have to rest, okay? That's how life is. The point is that you don't love it to the point that you don't work. Again, is it okay to enjoy rest? Yes, God gave you a whole day of rest called the Sabbath. Rest is an important thing to God, but you don't use rest as an excuse to never work, okay? All right, so the second, again, way to avoid pitfalls is to be hardworking and productive. The third is don't be a worthless person. You might say, well, that's kind of harsh. Well, there are people who are worthless. Okay? I'm not saying that because God does not give us inherent worth in the fact that we're his creation. He does. But he uses a word for them called a son of Belial, and really it's the idea that they're worthless. Right? They have no value to society. They have no value in what they actually bring. Because again, just because you have inherent value as a human being, which you do, again, I cannot take your life because you're made in God's image. It would be wrong of me to murder you. But that does not mean that I am somehow responsible to make up for all of your stupidity. There are people in society that the Bible does describe as worthless in the sense that they bring nothing to the table. They're almost a plague to society, someone who drains society. And I don't mean that, again, not a negative way. Again, Christ came and died for all people. Christ came and did a lot of things for all sorts of people. But if someone rejects what Christ gave, do they get to experience his grace still even though they rejected it? When they die, are they going to go to heaven when they reject God's grace? No. In the same way, if someone knows what is right and they continue to live a worthless life, I should not be expected to somehow make up for them not receiving what was initially given. So don't have an imbalanced view of life. I know that sounds harsh because we live in a Christianity today that just says, well, you should just love people. And by the way, I agree, you should love people. But because I love people, there are certain things I don't want in life. For example, if I love my son, does that mean I should let him hang out with the worst children in the world because I'm supposed to love them? No, because I love my son, what would I not allow around him? The worst people in the world. That's like saying, hey, if you love the rapist, you should let him in the house right next to your son's bed. Don't you love him? Well, yeah, I want to see him saved. I want to see him change his life, but I love someone else much more than the rapist. I love my own child and his safety to where that person's never coming anywhere near my child. For example, even at church here, we have policies in place to make sure people who serve in children's ministries are background checked. Because if someone ever has an abuse thing against a child, guess where they're not helping? They're not going to help there. And it's, well, if you loved them, you'd let them serve in there. It's like, well, no, because I love these children, they can't serve in here. And so again, don't let love be so misconstrued that you think, well, I have to somehow give everything or allow everything. Maybe put it that way. Allow everything because of love. You don't allow everything because of love. Because of love, sometimes you have to prohibit certain things. And even my own child, because I love him, I prohibit him from touching the fireplace and touching the stove and doing things that would cause him great harm in life. Prohibition is often a greater act of love than allowance because prohibition actually requires effort on your end. So when it comes to these sons of Belial, these sons of worthlessness, here's how they act. Here's why the Bible describes them as worthless, or here's how the Bible describes a worthless person. Again, first he says a naughty person, which we don't use that word very often anymore. I like it though. It's like in James where he says superfluity of naughtiness, or how do you say it? Superfluity? How would you actually say that in English today? It's obviously superfluity cannot be the right way to say it. It's like superfluous, but because you add ity to it, it's somehow pronounced differently. Those things in English always are bizarre to me. But you have a naughty person here, and the idea of a naughty person is someone who's really just evil. They're not what they should be. In fact, the word here is the word for Belial, right? They're a worthless person. In fact, the sons of Belial are always described as those that are always doing the opposite of what they should be doing usually. For example, when you get to 1 Samuel, the sons of Belial are Eli's sons. Eli's sons are called sons of Belial, sons of worthlessness. right? They have no worth. Why? Because to be a son of God is to have great worth. If Belial is a euphemism for Satan, right, another way to speak of Satan, then what? If Satan has no worth, so what worth do you have? No worth. And that's the whole point, right? You can be a son of God and have great worth. You can be a son of Belial and have no worth. So whose son do you want to be? So this person is, right, they're a Belial person, right? They're worthless in life because, again, they've decided to do the works of Satan, essentially. Right? Everything they do is then pronounced in these ways. So they're a Belial. They're a wicked person, right? Wickedness is that idea of evil, right? They just do evil. That's how they live life. They're by nature just always doing evil. And I get people by nature are sinful. People by nature are full of iniquity. But again, this person has never repented of that. They continue on in those things. There's never a change. If there is a change, it's for a moment and they go back to it. It's kind of, again, the proverb later on where I'll talk about, right, as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool returns to his folly, right? So again, we don't want to be that kind of person. So it's a wicked man. And then he says, he walketh with a froward mouth. Again, froward here is the idea of perversity, right? When they speak, they twist what's true. They twist what's right. And again, that's almost worse because you almost take truth and you present it in such a way that it's slightly twisted that even the most wise person might fall for it. Again, it's the idea of love. People love to guilt Christians with love, right? If you loved your child, you would sign a loan for him. If you loved your child, you would do all these things for them. Don't you love them? And guess what? It's actually a perversity. It's a twisting of truth. It's no, because I love them, I have to hold back because they need to grow. If you loved your child, wouldn't you let them sit in the oven? No, if I love my child, I would never let them in the oven. In fact, because I love my child, when they reach out for the oven, I go, why? Because this hurts a whole lot less than this. Why? Because to twist things is one of the worst things. Satan does that, by the way. What you're going to see here is a lot of descriptions of Satan's character. Satan twists truth, right? Satan twisted God's truth, right? Ye shall not surely die. God knows in the day that ye eat thereof, you shall be as God, knowing good and evil. By the way, was that true? Yes. They knew good and evil. Satan just twisted the truth just enough that he got them to sin, and look what it brought. Twisting of the truth is one of the most dangerous things. That's why I always warn about who you listen to when it comes to Bible. Why? Because people will often present just enough truth and twist it just enough that you're in all sorts of weird fallacies, all sorts of weird issues. And you think you're right because it's just logical enough. It sounds just right enough. And again, be very careful. So again, they walk with a forward mouth. They're always twisting the truth. It says he winketh with his, when it comes to this, by the way, it says he winketh with his eyes. He speaketh with his feet. He teaches with his fingers. Again, the point is that he never really means what he says. Again, have you ever heard someone say something and then they wink at you? Have you ever done it with a child, by the way, with an adult? You'll say something to a child that's really not quite true because you're trying to mess with them. And I don't know if that's sin or not. Okay, I do that to kids. I'm just a sinner. I'll be at the altar Sunday. But you kind of say a joke to a child and you wink at the adult, like kind of like go on with it, right? Let's go on with this prank. This will be really funny, right? Because you're twisting what's true. Why? Because you told them something, but you winked at them so they know that's not what you were actually intending or doing. He speaketh with his feet, right? And the point is that what he actually does is different than what he actually says. By the way, if you have someone who always does the opposite of what they say, they're a worthless person. They're a son of Belial. They are someone that God despises. And by the way, God despises that greatly, and we'll see that in our next point in a moment. But they speak with their feet. Their actions speak a lot louder than their words. And they teach us with his fingers. The idea there is when he instructs, it's not that he's a speaker who uses his hands, okay? But he kind of has secret signs that he does so people know what he's actually saying. Oh yeah, or you could say crossing your fingers. That's a good way to put it too, right? In fact, we just watched Willy Wonka last night. The real one, okay? The one with, what's his name? He's Gene Wilder, thank you, yes. And I watched it, I was like, this guy is just so wonderful. And maybe you hate Gene Wilder, but he has a dear place in my heart because of Willy Wonka. And but you'll see in that movie, right, Veruca, the bane of existence herself, right, when he goes to give the everlasting gobstopper, right? He puts it and he says, don't give it to anybody. And she says, I swear I won't. And right behind the camera shows her fingers right behind her back because she's what? She's lying. Right? She's done a sign to say, I don't have to tell the truth because I know that I don't intend to do it. And because I did it this way, I'm not being dishonest because, well, I know that I didn't mean it. With this, though, too, it's also the idea, again, of secret symbols, different gestures you give someone so they know you don't really mean what you're saying. And again, you might have different signs for that, whatever it is, but this is a person you don't want to be around. You don't want to be around people who have secret signs, who are just trying to, be a liar to you, right? It's kind of like when someone else is there and knows the truth, they have secret signs to say, don't say that so I can say what I need to say. So again, be very careful of that kind of person. It's a very wicked person. A worthless person twists truth and causes trouble. Again, in verse 14, right? Forwardness, which you've already said, forwardness is the idea of perversity. It's in his heart. He deviseth mischief continually. He soweth discord. So in his very heart and his very person, who he is what? Perversity. Right? I don't mean perverse as in they just say inappropriate things. Okay, we tend to say someone's perverted now if they say inappropriate things. But perverted and perverseness deals with twisting things. Right? It's in their very nature. That's what they do. They just twist everything. Right? You say something and they twist it even though they know that's not what you meant because they don't want to do what you said. And I'll say, but you said, but you're like, but that's not what I meant. And they know it's not what you meant. But they do it anyways. Why? Because that's a perverse person. It's in their very heart. They don't want to do what's right. They want to do what's wrong. He deviseth mischief continually, right? His plans are mischief. They're evil, right? He's always planning evil. He's trying to do evil, right? He's trying to make it so evil is what he can accomplish in life. And so his plans are always, okay, what can I do to make sure I get my way here? What can I do to make sure I get my way there, right? Because it's not that they want to do what's right. It's that they want their evil way to be accomplished. So they're planning how they can get it done. And again, anybody who's ever lived probably has done this at some point in their life, right? If you've not been saved your whole life, which no one has, but unless you were saved really young, you've all probably lived through a phase where you did kind of devise mischief in your heart, where you're trying to plan to do what's wrong and see if you can get away with it. And so again, this person, that's what they do. It's a worthless person, right? Instead of spending their time having plans that would be of benefit, they have plans that cause destruction in others. And then it says, he soweth discord. Again, the word for discord really is the idea, it's the opposite of the idea of defending someone. Again, in Hebrew, you have kind of a little letter that you put on the front of a word that kind of gives the idea of from, which attached to a noun could even give the idea of opposite of whatever this other thing is. So you have a noun in Hebrew that's the idea of to defend someone. And they attach this little letter to it. It's kind of our idea of an M. And they put a little M on it, basically. And now it's the opposite. So instead of defending someone, they're basically trying to sow discord, speak evil of them, so other people might have a problem with them. Right? And so that's why I always say of Christians, you should always defend people. You know why? Because to listen to someone else attacking them is discord. That's what that is. To listen to them accuse, to listen to them say evil, to listen to them do all these things. That's discord. Again, who is the accuser? Satan is. So if you want to go ahead and just speak evil of people, you are of your father the devil, and his works ye shall do. And that's probably what I think of you if you're that kind of person. I don't mean that in a mean way. I just mean it in, I'm not surprised that people do what Satan does. And so again, we should not be people who speak ill of others, who are trying to just plant thoughts. People do that too. They'll plant a little thought, right? It's kind of like they have a big grand scheme concerning a person. They'll plant a little thought here, a little thought there, a little thought over here. And so when it's all said and done, everybody else has enough little bad thoughts about whoever that when they're ready to pounce on whoever it is, everybody's on the person's side who's causing the mischief. So if you ever have someone who comes to you and they start planting a little thought here, they start speaking ill of someone over there, be very careful, because chances are they're probably a worthless person, right? That's not someone you should give value to. Because by the way, the people you give value to are the people that you listen to. It's the people that you trust. Why? Because you've placed value on them. Like, I like the idea of worthless because it's the idea of a balance even, right? In that culture, if something was heavier, it was worth more. That's why you'll find the word honor in Hebrew is the word for weight. Because again, if you put something on a balance, the more valuable thing weighs it down more. So what? It has more value because it weighs down the balance more. And so you see this all throughout their culture. They use really just good words for things that visualize things, right? So it has more worth because it's more valuable, so it's heavier. Well, in that same sense, if someone's a worthless person, you place no value on them, not meaning that you would never help them, but meaning that you don't trust them, you don't listen to them, right? They have no heaviness in your life, right? You see them for what they are. They're worthless. They're not someone I should ever listen to. They're not someone I should ever be friends with. They're not someone I should ever be close to. Why? Because look at the destruction they bring. And then we'll see here as well, concerning a worthless person, their end is irreparable destruction. It says, therefore shall his calamity come suddenly. Suddenly shall he be broken without remedy. And so again, when his calamity comes, it's quick, it's fast, it's unexpected. He doesn't even expect it. By the way, I've never met a wicked person who ever expected to get caught. In fact, every bank robber, the reason they get caught is they have to do it again. We used to watch a show called White Collar, probably several years ago. But it's about a guy who essentially did white-collar crime, and now the FBI is using him to help detect white-collar crimes. And you'll find all throughout the show, he himself is also devising how he can do more white-collar crimes. And guess what? When the calamity comes, he never expects it. It always surprises him because he planned everything out. And he always had to do a little bit more, have a little bit more valuable thing. And guess what? Eventually, it catches up with him. And yes, the show ends happy, I'm sure. I think it ended happy. I don't remember if we watched the last season or not, but I'm sure it ended happy because even on TV, even the wicked prosper. But in real life, that's not how that happens. In real life, when it catches up to you, it catches up to you. And it's just as surprising. And so again, when it comes to the person who lives in wisdom, they don't have to live with surprises. They tend to live with knowing what to expect because they can see far into the future, as we've studied. But the person who lives in wickedness, everything's always shocking, everything's always surprising. By the way, if everything in your life is always shocking and surprising, maybe really evaluate how you're living because you shouldn't be living life in emergency mode all the time. It's a very dangerous way to live. So again, I like how he uses the word broken here. It's the word for shattered. It gives you imagery from Jeremiah. Jeremiah is told by God in Jeremiah 19 to go buy a little vessel from a pottery maker. He goes and he buys the vessel, and he's told to take the leaders of the city out, pronounce judgment on them, and says, because of what you've done, and he's supposed to take the pottery and throw it to the ground. Why? Because once pottery is broken, can it ever truly be mended? No. And I've seen people try to remedy it and mend it and glue it all back together, but guess what? Even if you mend it, guess what you can still see? You can see all the cracks. And so guess what? Even if you can mend it and see all the cracks, do you really trust that vessel to hold anything? No. Which means what? It's still irreparable. It can never go back to the way it was. And no matter what fancy object lesson someone shows about someone's life being shattered and being put back together, it never really goes quite back together. Now, can God do a lot in someone's life? Yes. This is why I think you should never give up on people. You should always pray for them. You should always witness to them. You should always do all those things. Even Stephen on Sunday, we saw how the Sanhedrin, when they finally killed him, it was the 4th time they heard about Jesus. God kept giving them chances. But by the same token, if someone's irreparable, don't think that somehow you can fix it. And by the way, you don't want to be that person. Because sometimes things in life, although God can bring healing, they're never fully fixed on this side of eternity. Sometimes the destruction is felt all throughout life, and that can be very hard. And it can be very difficult. So again, when it comes to us, we shouldn't want to be a worthless person. Again, a worthless person is one that is perverted in their speaking, right? They twist truth. They speak ill of others. They try to cause problems. They try to plan evil things. Again, if that's you, God thinks of you as someone who's worthless. You're not someone who holds value because of what you do. You're someone who has little value because you won't change. And then you're shocked when something bad happens. And I'll say this as an aside, we'll move on. It always makes me laugh. The people who are always shocked something bad happened were the people that were doing bad. And they're always the people that are most shocked. I didn't know what I was doing. Really? Even I saw what you were doing. I didn't know what I was doing. And it's those people, and you can see why, in a sense, the Bible calls them Belial or worthless, because they don't even know what's going on. And they're so shocked when things happen. And then we see here as well, here's the final thing that we should do to avoid pitfalls. Well, we should avoid actions the Lord hates. That seems pretty obvious, but maybe it's not always so obvious, because I think some of the things that we think aren't a big deal are things that God actually hates. We often act like certain things in this listing aren't a big deal, but I guarantee if you do these things, God looks at these things as some of the most wicked things in existence. So we'll see here that Solomon's going to give what's called an ascension list, right? 6 things, yea, 7 things. In fact, you'd say it today, maybe you'd say 6 things. No, wait, 7 things, right? You kind of pause, right? It's kind of an effect thing, right? When you're talking with someone and you're waiting and it kind of builds up suspense a little bit. And so he'll do that here, but really the idea is that each subsequent thing is actually greater in degree, and again, it could be better or worse depending on the list, than the previous thing, with the final thing being the worst of all things. You can even say it's the culmination of all the previous things, but really, I would say in this list, it's the worst of all things. And the point is that God hates that the most, which, by the way, when we get to this list, when you realize what God hates the most, it should change how some of us behave. Because you'll find it's associated with the son of Belial. Here's what he says. These 6 things that the Lord hates, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him. Again, he mentions hate and abomination. Again, both those words, while they can have some nuance to them, the point of him repeating it is to show you that God really hates these things. Again, a Jewish person, when they repeat ideas, is to intensify the idea. Again, so he could say hate, hate, or abomination, abomination, but in poetry, it doesn't flow as well. So in poetry, what they would do is they would just say 2 similar words to convey the idea of that which was greater or greatest, right? God really hates these things. God really detests these things. God really despises these things. Again, the idea is you look at it and you're like, oh, I don't want to, oh, what's wrong with that? Oh, goodness. Again, if you've ever changed a baby's diaper that's formula fed, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You open it up and it's like, oh my goodness, because for whatever reason, especially if they're on specialty formula, how many of you have had to change a baby's diaper who was on soybean formula or specialty formula? It's atrocious, okay? How many of you have had to change a baby's diaper once they get on solid foods? Yeah, breast milk, for whatever reason, doesn't really smell that bad. In fact, even our boys, until they were like, 8 months old, their poops don't really smell. You kind of got to figure out that they've pooped. And it kind of has like a maybe hint of it smell, but it's not like super bad smell. But as soon as they start eating real food, oh my goodness. It's a whole nother level. And my wife will look at me and she'll say, Josh, I'm not dealing with this. This is yours. And what that means is that it's really bad because I'm a man, so men don't tend to have, I don't think, the smelling ability of women at times. And so some things are just my job because I can't fully smell what's there. But even I can smell it then when I get close enough. And the point is what? It kind of makes you go, oh my goodness. What's wrong with you? What did you eat? Again, it's what you do as spouses when you get in bed and one spouse makes a little noise. And you go, oh, what did you eat? Are you feeling okay, right? The point is what? It's not like you want more of that, right? The point of abomination and hatred is to despise something. It's something you look at and you're like, oh my goodness. Or you look at that and say, how could they do that? Right? There's different ways to look at hatred and abomination. It's all those things. It's this idea of disgust. It's this idea of how could you do that? And this idea where it's almost revolting to you. It makes you sick at the idea of it even happening. It bothers you that much. For example, when you hear of people murdering children and you meditate on it, does that make you feel good or bad? It makes you feel bad, sometimes to the point where it turns your stomach. There was a movie that came out a couple years ago called The Sound of Freedom. Is that what it was called? It was about child sex trafficking. People who all went and saw it, they came out of it and said, I just felt so sick. Why? Because that's what an abomination is. That's what a hatred is. It makes you sick to your stomach and say, how could someone do that? When it comes to God, you have to realize that God has never done any of these things. When it comes to us, we look at those things as bad because we haven't done it. There's a reason I'll often say a murderer even looks at a child predator as worse than him. Why? Because a murderer can't even think of doing that. And he'll think, how could you do that? I mean, I killed someone. How could you do that? And the murderer thinks that he's somehow righteous compared to the child predator. But again, it's because it's subjective. I haven't done that, so I'm better than you. Well, what about God who's never done any of these things? How do you think he looks at the things that he lists? Well, I guarantee you he looks at it all as anyone would look at a child predator or a murderer. Why? Because he looks at it and says, how could you do that? Why would you do that? Why would that enter into your heart to do that? It's so gross. Why would you do that? Because that's how God actually looks at our sin. Because it's objective. For us, it's subjective because we all sin. So your sin's worse than my sin because I didn't do what you did. Or my sin's still better than your sin because I did that same sin a little bit better than you did. How many of you have ever heard someone try to justify something that they attacked you for, and they do the same thing? How many of you have ever heard someone try to do that? Yeah, we all have. Why? Because that's just how people are. Because, well, when I did it, it wasn't as bad as when you did it. That's how people act. So what are these things? Well, we're going to see that these things all kind of, even, by the way, I'll say this and move on. These things all give kind of a hissing sound when it's said. So it's interesting in that first verse when he says, these 6 things that the Lord hate, a 7 are an abomination to him. In Hebrew, it's only really, I think it's 6 words in the verse. And 4 of the 6 words have a sound to it, because the idea of hissing. Right? To hiss at something was to show you're despised for it in that culture. So even in the verse, as he sets it up, he says all these things with sounds to make it sound like someone's hissing at it or despising it. Now, we don't get that in our culture because we get to read it in English. But it's interesting that he even sets it up that way so a person, as they heard this, would hear and the different sounds to realize this is a terrible thing. So what does God hate? Well, we'll read through the verses, then we'll go through this. He hates a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, and heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. And the first thing he mentions is pride, right? A proud look. Again, the idea of a proud look is someone who's high-nosed. That's the word for pride in Hebrew. It's to be high-nosed, right? You're too good for everyone. You're too good for everything. You didn't do it my way. You didn't whatever, right? This person thinks a lot of themselves. And what? They walk everywhere with what? Kind of a high nose. I'm too good for all of you. Like we had these people at college, not because they meant to be this way, but when you take speech class, they teach you how to actually even walk with proper posture. They say you should imagine a thread on your head and that something is pulling your head up like this. You know why? Because you walk with proper posture. But guess what? You also look like a jerk. Everywhere you go. So it's like I can have proper posture, I can look like a jerk. So I'm going to decide to not look like a jerk. Because, again, when you walk around like this everywhere, not just that, but you kind of look a little, you're a little too good for everyone, right? You're a little high-nosed, right? I'm too good for this. And so again, if you walk with proper posture, God bless you. I don't think any less of you. But if people didn't know that, those people who did that at college when I was there, they all thought they were stuck up, and they were some of the nicest people I knew. And guess what? Because of the way they walk, it brings off that appearance. Now, what here is just saying, right, the person who's proud, right? They have a proud look. They're proud in what they do. They exhibit pride. By the way, God hates pride. The Bible says God resists the proud. As in, when someone's trying to come to God, if they're going to come to him in pride, he keeps them at arm's length and says, you're not coming. That's why he'll say in James, right? He says, God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. And he says, but he giveth more grace, right? As in, if you'll humble yourself, guess what? You can have all the grace that God will ever give you. But if you're going to be proud, it's almost like a child who tries to get to an adult to punch him and keep him at an arm's length by what? Putting your hand on their head and said, you're not going to come near me, right? Get away from me. By the way, how many of you have done that to your own children, okay, right? They come at you or your grandkids and they try to get you and you put them at your arm out and hold their head, right? That's kind of the idea that's given there, right? He keeps those that are proud at an arm's length. They're not coming to God. Because if you're going to come to God, you're going to come in humility. You're not going to come proud. So God, the first thing he hates is a proud look. By the way, what's the first sin recorded in the Bible? Or recorded in biblical history? Maybe not in the Bible, but biblical history. Pride. Who has it? Satan does. Yeah. Right? So iniquity was found in thine heart because you said, I will be like the Most High. I will be like God. So again, pride is a huge problem because, again, it causes you to sin. It's your way. You think you're always right. By the way, if you think you're always right, guess what you are? Not right. You're proud. Because only a proud person can ever be corrected or ever be wrong. So God despises a proud look. He despises those that think that they're, in a sense, better than others, okay? More worthy of things than others in a sense. And by the way, when I'm talking about worthlessness, I'm not saying that people don't have inherent value in creation. I'm talking about the worth that you place on them and how you listen to them, how you do things with them. Right? There are certain people that you should just not be around. The second thing is lying, right? A lying tongue. This is something everyone universally struggles with. Again, pride was the first sin. A lie was the second sin. And of course, disobedience was the third, because as soon as Satan falls, he goes to Adam and Eve and does what? Lies. Do you think God thinks lying's a big deal? Yeah, lying brings about the first human sin. The fact that people would ever lie is terrible, right? That's why you should always be careful that what you say is fully accurate as well, because if it's not, you in a sense are lying. It could be even unintentional. You should try to be as accurate as you can be. And I get sometimes you might miss things. That's life. But you should want to be accurate. You should want to be as precise as possible because you should want to speak the truth. By the way, Jesus is the truth. And if you're to reflect him, what should be coming out of you? Truth. And if you're going to lie, then you're a son of Belial. You're something that God despises. Harming the innocent, right? He says, hands that shed innocent blood. Again, those that would ever harm the innocent at all. Again, this goes to how you treat people who are innocent, such as orphans and widows. That's how the Bible would present it in James. Even in the prophets, how do you treat those that have nothing? Or those that don't even deserve to be harmed? By the way, are there people in society that deserve to be harmed? Yes, okay. I'm glad you all answered yes. We have this thing called capital punishment. You know why? Because God said, if you shed man's blood, by man shall your blood be shed. Right? There are people in our society that are worthy of being harmed and are worthy of suffering harmful consequences. But if someone's done nothing wrong, do they deserve to be harmed? No. And there are people who will harm others who have no deserving of it. And that's evil. That's wicked to ever hurt someone who does not deserve it. By the way, even in the New Testament age, you shouldn't always harm those that deserve it. Because Jesus is going to tell us to what? Turn the other cheek, right? Pray for those that persecute you. Did Stephen pick up stones to throw back at those that were throwing stones at him? No. By the way, you'll find for Christians that we don't even usually always harm those that are deserving of it. I read a post yesterday, my wife read me a post from Instagram of someone that she knows who kept trying to say, you don't always have to forgive people. And you know me, that makes my skin crawl. I think you always have to forgive people. I'm just being honest. You always have to forgive. And the person tried to say, because if they haven't asked for forgiveness, you don't have to give it. And I thought in my head immediately, on Sunday, we read about Stephen, who got stoned by all these people, and he says, Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them. Forgive them. Forgive them. Forgive them. Did they ask for forgiveness as they're killing Stephen? No. But even Stephen, because he's a Christian, decides to not bring harm to his accusers, but actually pray for their forgiveness. That's just an aside. That's free. But you don't harm the innocent. Hearts that plot evil plans. Again, this is something that was said of the wicked man, the worthless man, right? He says, an heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, right? He wants to plan evil. It's in his very heart to plan evil. It's part of who he is. He's going to plot in life. I want to do this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this. Now to him, it's not evil. But to everyone else it is, because what? It brings harm. It brings destruction. Feet that run to evil, right? That run to mischief. Right? They're always trying to cause problems, right? Everywhere they go, what can I do? What can I do to cause problems? What can I do to cause problems here? I just want to cause problems everywhere I go. I want to cause evil wherever I am. I want to cause harm wherever I can. And usually it's because they find humor in it. But you'll often find the scorner to be characteristic of these things, because the scorner is someone who finds humor in what's wrong. So again, their feet are quick to run to evil, to run to what's wrong. They're a false witness. By the way, a false witness is worse than a liar. Because a liar could just be me trying to lie to you to get out of my own hurt. Okay? You could say, did you do that? And I could just say no. Why? Because I'm trying to preserve myself. A false witness stands there concerning someone else. So why is this worse? Because it's not just about preserving me. Now I'm going to go on the offense and hurt someone else with my lies. That's why it's worse. Because again, if you stood in a court and a judge says, did you see so-and-so shoot someone? And you lie and say yes, and they're going to go to jail for it, maybe be put to death for it. That's worse than just, hey, did you brush your teeth? Well, no. Or yes. or whatever it is, right, to try to get out of whatever you're trying to do. Because again, there are weights to things. That's why a false witness is worse, because it doesn't just preserve you, it harms someone else. And anything that harms someone else is far worse. Why? Because now it's not just you involved. You've now brought harm to someone else who didn't deserve it. And finally, the person who sows discord. Where he says, again, there in verse 19, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. And again, this kind of goes with the false witness thing, because usually when you're trying to sow discord, you're usually lying. Usually you're twisting something. It's kind of the culmination of all of them. Why? Because you're quick to run to mischief, right? That's why you're sowing discord. You're quick to do certain things. You're quick to devise evil, because you don't just sow discord. You have to plot what you're going to say and what you're going to think and what you're going to do and how you're going to say it, how you're going to present it. And you're not just lying. You're bearing false witness, because usually you're speaking a lie about the other person or not presenting the truth in its full sense, because if you were, people wouldn't think what you're going to try to make them think. For example, okay, this is not to be political, but I watched the debate last night because I watch all the debates. I love to torture myself, so I like to watch people yell at each other. Okay, that's where I find apparently not joy in life. Okay, but one of the things that's been brought up in every debate is, right, Trump said there were good people on both sides. By the way, Trump didn't say that if you listen to the whole quote. Why? It's just enough of a twisting of the truth to make people think that Trump likes racists. And so what happens? It's a sowing of discord, because you are, you're bearing a false tale that you know is false. You're devising how to say it so vaguely so people think something different. And you're causing people to, instead of trusting someone, now they don't trust him because you lied about them. So that's just a practical way that maybe some of you watched that last night, so you at least have something to attach it to now, to say, this is why this is an issue. Because again, when you sow discord, you're basically trying to get others to view someone else differently. You're trying to cause issues. And in fact, I like the way that Solomon says it. He says, he that soweth discord among brethren, this person's so wicked and so divisive and so kind of conniving in what they do, they could even make brothers hate each other. By the way, brothers should be the first people that love each other. So the Bible says there is a friend that sticks closer than a brother, because, again, the bond that brothers have is supposed to be really close. And that's the natural affection in 2 Timothy 3, right? The natural affection is the love you have for family. There's just a natural closeness there. There's a natural love there. There's a natural trust there. And someone who sows discord, they could even make people who are supposed to trust and love each other, because they've lived with each other their whole lives. They know each other. They could make even them hate each other. This is why this kind of person is dangerous. And by the way, to sow discord is extremely dangerous, because even in churches, you could have people who've served in ministry with each other for 10, 20, 30 years, right? As volunteers in church, who've loved each other, been there through things with each other, and all it takes is one person to whisper something wrong about someone else, and all of a sudden their whole view of that person has changed. I can't trust them now. I can't look at them the same way now. I can't whatever, and it's never been verified to be true. But it was presented that way just enough, because usually the person causing mischief wants something. They usually want position. They usually want, maybe they want people to give them their trust so they have more say on something, right? And they will sow discord. So people will listen to them. This happens in every facet of life. And my whole point is this is the worst of the worst kind of person. There's a reason the Bible says, and it's only of this kind of person in the Bible, a person who's a heretic. Heretic means a divisive person. You admonish them twice, as in you say, stop, don't do that again. They do it again. You say, stop, don't do that again. They do it a third time, and the Bible says you reject them. You know why? Because there is no one more dangerous in life than the person who will try to bring discord to the place there should be unity. This is why God says, 6 things I hate, yea, 7 are an abomination. This is the worst of the worst. By the way, this is what Satan does between Adam and Eve and God. Right? God is holding out on you, Adam and Eve. He knows the day you'll eat thereof, you'll be just like him. And so what happens? They eat because now they don't trust God. Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe that's how God really is. I guess I will eat. I guess I will do this, even though I know God doesn't want me to, because, he lied. He lied to me. And did Satan fully lie there? Not fully lied, but he left out enough that they believe his lie. That's the sowing of discord. to even make people who should be in full trust of each other. I mean, God created Adam and Eve. God gave Adam a wife. God had Adam do all sorts of wonderful things, but because of Satan's mischief, it turns their trust of God into something where they don't trust him and they do what is evil against God. Because again, this is a big deal. So when you go around and you might say ill of others, be very careful what you say, because it's very probable, in fact, very likely, that when you speak ill of others, you are sowing discord. You are causing mischief. So I'm very careful with people. I usually, even if people are wrong, I will tend to defend them in some way. I'll try to say, maybe this part's misunderstood, maybe this or that. You know why? Because I cannot see someone's heart. I can see their actions. But if something's just reported to me and someone says, well, so-and-so, they did this and this and this, I find quite often what people report is usually half true. It's usually half true. And so you know what I find? Still think the best of people no matter what I hear, because until I've seen it, I cannot confirm it to be true. Why? Because Satan reported about God something that was not true. Did God deserve to be looked at that way? No, there's no one more trustworthy in the whole universe besides God. And because of what Satan said, it caused doubt and distrust, which caused them to what? Do evil against God. And Satan has done that all throughout history. Even today, there's a whole church called the Church of Satan who hates God. And what? They've been deceived by Satan to say, we don't want God. God's holding out on us. God has something more for us, and he's holding out on us. To where what? They distrust the one they should trust because he created them. So here's our applications, and we'll be done. First, kind of going to our usury thing, don't meddle in things you cannot control. Meaning, if you're not the one that is solely responsible, don't involve yourself, especially with usury. The only person you can guarantee the faithfulness of is yourself. So be careful of being the guarantee for others, right? Don't be the person who's trying to be there and say, hey, I'll pay it if they don't. You know why? Because you can't control them. You can only control you, which means don't involve yourself in things that you cannot control in what they're doing. Second, work hard in life, working with integrity for the preparation of the future. This should be kind of your mission goal, right? When you go to a job, I want to work hard with integrity so I can prepare for the future. Why do you work? So I can work hard with integrity to prepare for the future. That's why we work. We don't work because we all love it, okay? There are things about our jobs we love, but even pastoring, I love my job, but there are certain things about my job I do not love. But what? I should still work hard in life, working with integrity. Why? Because there's a future to prepare for. And one day, I'm not going to be able to pastor anymore because I'll be so old. I'll probably be out of my mind, and they'll be saying, can you please leave already? And finally, avoid being a person that has the qualities that God hates. God does hate certain things. Okay? God is love. By the way, because God is love, God must hate. Because love cannot exist without hate. Because you love, you must also hate. Which means if you love certain things, you must also hate the antithesis of those things. So avoid qualities that God hates. The end of such a person is irreparable destruction in this life. Again, it does not mean that a saved person will never do those things. But if they do those things, they'll never recover here. Will they still have a place with Christ? Yes. Even the man who was with his stepmother in 1 Corinthians, the Bible says his spirit will be saved in the day of Jesus Christ. Will they still be with Jesus? Yes. But there is destruction that has occurred that will not be repaired here. Quite often it's repaired later when Jesus comes. But the point is you don't want to live a destroyed life now. Life, although it is short, feels very long when you're living it in a way that's destructive because you get to live in the worst of it. Life when it's good goes by fast. Life when it's hard goes by slow. So again, don't live life in a way that's destructive. You'll be miserable, and you'll be miserable for a long time because it'll feel like forever. So here's the prayer that I think is appropriate. Lord, help me to have the wisdom to not be a guarantor for others. Help me to work hard with integrity, giving me wisdom to plan for the future. Help me to avoid qualities in my life that you would hate. Help me to live a life that you would love and approve of. Why? Because these are the pitfalls of life, are really things that God hates. And a lot of it's for our safety. Does God want you to take care of others, in a sense? Yes. But he gives you an area where he says, be careful of this, though. Why? Because just because you should take care of others doesn't mean you always can. So what? You need to have a wisdom in life where you can look and say, is this good or bad right now? And by the way, being usury for or being a guarantee for someone is always a bad thing. because they'll usually, statistically, not pay. And you will. You want to work hard with integrity. You don't need to have oversight. Someone doesn't need to say, hey, did you get that done? Nothing bothers me more than when I have to ask someone, hey, did you get that done? And they tell me no. And it's like, I asked you because I trust you. And what it teaches me about people often is who I can and can't trust. Because if I ask someone to do something and they don't do it, and again, it's not because I'm the Lord of everyone's life, but if they said, I'll do it, I kind of expect them to, because they said they would. And so what? They shouldn't have to have my oversight to say, okay, well, Pastor Josh, you right now watching me to make sure I get it done? No, there should be integrity. To what? Not need oversight, not need initiative. They just do what they should. And then again, we don't want to be like the worthless person. You don't want to be a son of Belial. That's a son of Satan. You're, if you're in Christ, a son of God. And you should want to live like it. You shouldn't want the qualities of someone else's household. You should want to live like the household you're in. So I hope this is helpful. If it's not, then I'm sorry. I know tonight probably seems more harsh than what it should be. I don't know. But it's always harsh to say things like the beginning. So I'm sorry if I've offended anyone. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's always that. In fact, you'll find it with other lists in Proverbs. Most of the rest of the lists in Proverbs are all positive. You'll see 3 and 4, 2 and 3, and part of it is to, one, it leaves it open-ended. So again, this list here is not exhaustive of all that God hates. Okay? The point of the list is, first, it leaves it open-ended, but 2, it's to describe the previous thing. The first thing's kind of the least of the things. The final thing's the worst of all things. Because in a way, it's kind of the culmination of all the previous things together. Again, it's not always done that way. With qualities, it tends to be done that way. You'll find it later on in Proverbs 30 with, I think it's not Lemuel. What's the other king? Agur, right, where he will talk about the way of a young man with a young woman, right? It'll talk about the way of a snake on a rock, or maybe it's whatever reptile it is on a rock. The way of this with that, the way of a ship in the sea, right? These things are incomprehensible to him, kind of a wonderful thing, an amazing thing. He can't quite figure it out. But the point is not to say that all those things are the same there, but one is greater than the next, right? So the final thing that he finds really wonderful is when he watches young people together and they're just falling in love, and it's like, wow, that's amazing. And I think we all agree. That's why we all like love stories, right? Hallmark is in business for a reason, because Proverbs 30 is true, and we're like, wow, that's just so nice. And you can never go back once you get married, so you better kindle the love that you have, because you'll never experience that young love again.